We're going to get started now. Before we get started, I want to make sure everyone has their cell phones on silent, members and the public. Welcome to the meeting. Welcome to the meeting of the Standing Committee on Government Operations. As always, we will begin with a prayer. Mr. O'Reilly, will you please lead us in prayer?
Thank you. If you wish to experience peace, provide peace for another. If you wish to know you are safe, cause another to know that they are safe. If you wish to understand seemingly incomprehensible things, help another to understand. If you wish to heal your own sadness or anger, seek to heal the sadness or anger of another. Dalai Lama.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. We have an agenda before us. I have a mover to adopt the agenda. Mr. Nadley, any declarations of conflicts of interest? Seeing none, we will move right into the proceedings. First, I'd like to introduce the members around the table. We have some committee members as well as some regular members who are joining us. I'll let them introduce themselves, starting on my left.
Thank you and welcome. My name is Corey Van Thyn, MLA for Yellowknife North.
Good evening. Welcome. My name is Michael Nadley, MLA for Decho.
Good evening. Danny McNeely, Satu Region.
Kevin O'Reilly, Frame Lake.
And I'm RJ Simpson, MLA for Hay River North and Deputy Chair of the Standing Committee on Government Operations. With us we have April Taylor, our committee researcher, and Jennifer Franki-Smith, our committee clerk trainee. Today, the Standing Committee on Government Operations is holding a public hearing on Bill 18, Cities, Towns, and Villages Act. The Standing Committee on Government Operations is a committee of regular members of the Legislative Assembly. The bill we are reviewing today was introduced by the government, given first and second reading in the Legislative Assembly, and then referred to the Standing Committee for review. It's our responsibility as a Standing Committee to consult with residents of the NWT on what they like or don't like about the bill. We would like to hear your views and comments, which we will then report back to our colleagues in the Assembly. First, I'll briefly describe the intent of the bill. Bill 18, Cities, Towns, and Villages Act amends the Cities, Towns, and Villages Act to authorize municipal councils to impose a tax on tourist accommodations and to pass bylaws allowing property owners to finance energy efficiency or renewable energy works through local improvement charges. There are copies of the bill on the side table, and you may help yourself. If you'd like to share your views with us today, please let our clerk know. She'll make sure to get you on our list. We'll also accept written submissions by postal mail or email until Friday, September 28th at 5 p.m. One final piece of housekeeping. Please remember that all submissions will be part of official committee records and may be reflected in our final report. Any submissions made during this meeting may also be televised or broadcast via social media. Thank you everyone for your patience in allowing this introduction. With members' agreement, can we now open the floor to submissions? Thank you, members. So we have a list of presentations. The first is Kyle Thomas, Vice President, Yellowknife Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Thomas, please approach the witness stand, I guess.
All right.
The witness desk. So we have a sound technician who will control your microphone. You don't have to touch the microphone at all. If there is some back and forth with the committee members after your submission, it will run through me just so it's on the record who is speaking. So if you're ready, we go right ahead and begin your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening. My name is Kyle Thomas. I'm the Vice President of the YK Chamber, and I have a letter on behalf of the Yellowknife Chamber of Commerce and our membership of 390 businesses. We're excited to support Bill 18, an act to amend the Cities and Towns and Villages Act. We do have a couple comments this evening. In Section 70.1, under maximum rate, states that a council shall not impose a tax under this section that exceeds 4% of the daily accommodation rate. We would like to see this reduced to 3%, as our most recent letter of support dated July 31st, 2017 states. In Section 70.1, under exclusions, we support the proposed exclusions, but we would like to see lodging provided to a contractor in a work camp added. Similar exclusions can be seen in other jurisdictions across Canada, including Alberta. Under Section 70.1, agreements allows a municipal corporation to enter into an agreement with another person, authorizing the collection of a tourist accommodation tax and providing the administration and enforcement of any bylaw imposing a tourist accommodation tax. The position of the Yellowknife Chamber of Commerce, as referenced in a letter submitted to the Yellowknife City Council and forwarded to the members of the 18th Legislative Assembly, dated May 30th, 2016, is that a tourism accommodation tax should be administered and collected by the municipality. There are many models used across Canada. However, we feel this model would provide the greatest level of accountability. If the municipality chooses to release the funds to a DMO or third-party organization for the sole purpose of tourism initiatives, that's something we support. But we feel strongly that the municipality has the responsibility for the collection, administration, and enforcement of the tourist accommodation tax. Finally, under 70.3, use of revenue, we fully support this section of the Act and believe that the revenue collected as a part of the tourist accommodation tax should be restricted to spending on tourism initiatives only. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas, for your presentation. You referenced 2 letters that were submitted. Could you please give us the dates of those letters?
The first letter would have been sent, the second letter I referenced would have been the first that was sent to the Yellowknife City Council on May 30th, 2016. It would have been forwarded to the members of the 18th Legislative Assembly. The second letter, most recent letter of support, was dated July 31st, 2017.
Would you be able to forward those to committee again? Like those were prior to our consultation. That way everything's official and then it's on the official record, and that'd be appreciated. Would you be able to do that?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much, and we can arrange that with the clerk. Do the members have any questions for the witness? Going once, going twice. Nothing? All right, well, thank you very much for your presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
No worries. Next on our list, we have Sheila Bassi-Kellett from the city of Yellowknife. Nice.
More importantly, you have the mayor.
Oh,
I'm the conduit.
I thought his worship was here as an observer.
No, they're making me work tonight.
We're just going to give our tech team a minute to get the presentation ready, and then we'll proceed with the submission. So thank you to Mayor Hike for appearing before us. Would you mind introducing yourself and your witnesses, and then you can begin your presentation.
Absolutely. I have with me Sheila Bassi-Kellett, who's our Senior Administrative Officer, and Carrie Penny, who's our Director of Policy, Communications, and Economic Development. I'd also like to recognize a couple of my council colleagues who have joined us tonight, Shauna Morgan and Julian Morse. So, good evening, Mr. Chairman, committee members. On behalf of the City of Yellowknife, I thank you for the opportunity to appear before the Standing Committee this evening. It's a pleasure and an honor. I'd like to begin this evening by commending the Department of Municipal and Community Affairs for working in cooperation with the 6 tax-based municipalities in the NWT, including the City of Yellowknife, to ensure the important changes to the Cities, Towns and Villages Act proposed in Bill 18 were brought forward to the Legislative Assembly for consideration. The City of Yellowknife has been a vocal proponent of granting cities, towns, and villages the authority to establish, charge, and administer a levy on accommodations, something that a couple of the MLAs in the room this evening would probably be fairly familiar with from their time on City Council. The City also proposed amendments to the Cities, Towns, and Villages Act to enable community governments to use local improvement charges for the purpose of assisting property owners in implementing energy efficiency retrofits and adopting renewable energy technologies. My remarks will initially focus on the effects of the proposed tourist accommodation tax. I will then address the proposed legislation to permit local improvements on private property. City Council's vision for our community commits that we will strive to actively promote economic development and tourism. One of Council's 5 goals and objectives has been to strengthen and diversify the economy. To achieve this vision and goal, our city requires the ability to establish a levy on short-term accommodations. When you take a walk through downtown or head down the hill to Old Town, the number of international tourists visiting the north from all over the world is extremely apparent. Asian tourists have become big fans of the NWT for aurora viewing, and we are seeing a significant increase in visitors from China in particular. This year has been the Canada-China Year of Tourism 2018, and the efforts of the federal and territorial governments to strengthen the connection between our two countries has certainly been paying off for the NWT. So why do we want an accommodation levy in Yellowknife? Tourism in this area is a big deal, not just for hotels, restaurants, and tour operators, but for everyone who lives here. If anybody's been in the downtown Extra Foods recently, you'll notice that it's much more than the hospitality industry that's benefiting from tourists coming to Yellowknife. In general, income creation, economic diversification, and generating jobs are the 2 key benefits of a burgeoning tourism sector. In Yellowknife, tourism is one of the fastest growing sectors of our economy. There are hundreds of local jobs in tourism and scores of local businesses that wouldn't exist without tourists. To continue to grow tourism in NWT communities, we are asking the Government of the Northwest Territories to allow the tax-based communities to collect a levy on the daily cost of visitor accommodations. An accommodation levy will enable Yellowknife to use the revenues generated to fund tourism marketing to develop and expand our local tourism industry. In turn, this will develop and expand our local economy. Accommodation levies are a common best practice across Canada and the world and are used by many cities as a means to leverage funds to promote the area as a great place to visit. Without a levy, it will be very difficult for the City of Yellowknife to raise more funds to promote Yellowknife as a tourism destination. And without increased promotion, there will be slower growth in the tourism sector. That'll mean slower economic growth for Yellowknife, fewer new job opportunities, and less money circulating through the Yellowknife and NWT economies. I would like next to address the consultation that has already taken place on the changes to the Cities, Towns and Villages Act proposed in Bill 18. In July 2017, the Department of Municipal and Community Affairs circulated a discussion paper to generate discussion and collect feedback on the ability to establish, charge, and administer a tax on lodgings. MACA also held 2 facilitated focus group meetings in August 2017 to collect feedback from community governments. Senior staff members and elected officials were invited and encouraged to attend and discuss the proposition of an accommodation levy. Extensive consultations have taken place with the tax-based municipalities, and the time is now for the Northwest Territories to enable this new revenue source for us to implement. It is the City's position that through the consultations to date, the Government of the Northwest Territories has already heard from the tax-based communities. The City of Yellowknife recognizes that not all tax-based communities are interested in establishing a levy on accommodations at this time. After discussions with our sister communities, we support these changes to the Cities, Towns and Villages Act, which provide the option to community governments of implementing an accommodation levy. The proposed change to the CTV Act does not impose a levy on accommodation, but rather grants cities, towns, and villages the flexibility to diversify and grow our local economies in this way if our councils determine this to be a viable option for our communities. The city has the capacity and the desire to proceed with a levy. We see it as a necessary step to diversify and strengthen our local economy. The City of Yellowknife requires the ability to make such a choice in order to maintain our ability to compete in the current tourism market. At the same time, we appreciate that NWT towns and villages may choose to opt in at a later date. The City can break trail so that if and when they do, we will be pleased to share our implementation approaches and lessons learned for their consideration. The City has worked diligently to ensure residents and stakeholder groups understand what a levy can do for our community and surrounding area. As we have explored this issue, the City surveyed residents, and 69% of Yellowknifers who completed the survey in May 2017 supported the plan to raise money for tourism marketing through an accommodation levy. On January 26, 2018, Northwest Territories Tourism passed a motion in support of, quote, the development of amendments to the Cities, Towns and Villages Act to enable the collection of a destination marketing levy by municipalities that choose to do so, end quote. NWT Tourism also endorsed the city's vision and leadership in planning for tourism marketing and establishment of a destination marketing organization. On March 8, 2018, we also received a copy of a letter of support of levy legislation from the Yellowknife Hotel Association. Excuse me. The Yellowknife Hotel Association recognizes the importance of tourism to our territorial economy and how a levy can benefit the people of Yellowknife and the Northwest Territories. We do have some concerns, however. While generally supportive of the tourist accommodation tax section of Bill 18, I'd like to express reservations that the city has with respect to the exclusions listed in 70.15. As you may appreciate, the city would prefer that Bill 18 did not contain such an exhaustive list of exclusions. The exemptions currently include the Government of the Northwest Territories, a public agency as defined in the Financial Administration Act, medical travel, persons staying at a hospital, and any other class of prescribed persons or bodies. Our concerns are twofold. First, the City of Yellowknife has a limited number of accommodation providers that will be required to collect the levy, and as a result, a limited amount of marketing funds can be generated from this legislation. Each exemption affects the overall amount to be collected, which in turn greatly affects the number of dollars that can be applied to the city's tourism marketing efforts. Too many exemptions could affect the economic viability of an accommodation levy. Second, the city's second concern relates to the administrative burden that the current draft of the legislation places on accommodation providers. As written, the legislation requires front desk staff to make a determination about a person's reason for travel and whether an exemption applies. This could result in a confusing and complicated process for frontline staff that leads to unnecessary complications and an administrative burden that accommodation providers will have to assume. I'd now like to provide comments on the changes proposed in Bill 18 that would allow for local improvements on private property for energy efficiency or renewable energy works. And perhaps I should just clarify that I have my mayor's hat on right now. One, why do we want to be able to use local improvement charges to support private energy retrofit projects? The City of Yellowknife is committed to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and achieving sustainable community development. On May 12, 2014, City Council approved the plan to renew our community energy plan for the years 2015 to 2025, a plan that will help chart the course towards an energy-smart Yellowknife that aims to reduce the city's GHG emissions with a northern lens. One way to achieve the goals in this plan is to assist property owners with green retrofits. Research indicates that one of the obstacles Yellowknifers face when considering green retrofits for their homes is the cost. The use of local improvement charges is a tool that the city can use to address this financial concern. The city's Corporate and Community Energy Action Plan, 2015 to 2025, estimates that having 500 homeowners, roughly 12% of single-family homes, join the energy savings program, has a GHG reduction potential of 1,876 tons. An equivalent of 4% of the city's target would be attained. In April 2013, Council passed and forwarded a motion, number 0079-13, to the Northwest Territories Association of Communities in response to its call for resolutions. Use of local improvement charges to assist residents and businesses in implementing energy efficiency retrofits and/or renewable energy technologies. The resolution was approved at the NWTAC 2013 Annual General Meeting, reaffirmed in 2018, and put forward to the GNWT to review the CTV Act to make changes to allow for LICs for energy projects. In the GNWT's 2013 Energy Action Plan, there was a commitment made to consider changes to the CTV Act to allow this to happen. Looking ahead, this initiative will align with and support the objectives contained in the GNWT's 2030 Climate Change Strategic Framework. As discussed previously, in 2017, the Department of Municipal and Community Affairs circulated a discussion paper on this proposed change to tax-based communities and led facilitated meetings with senior administration and elected officials to obtain feedback. This proposed amendment is also permissive and merely grants a tax-based community the ability to use local improvement charges to facilitate green retrofits on private property. As such, it is at the discretion of each community to choose whether to exercise this authority. The city believes that this is an important tool that we can use to achieve a more environmentally sustainable community. The high cost of energy in the north is a major factor in the high cost of living in northern communities. And the ability to use local improvements to finance energy-saving retrofits is a practical and cost-effective method that municipalities can use to assist residents with this high cost of living. This type of program is currently being exercised in municipalities throughout Canada. The City of Yellowknife will look to other jurisdictions for guidance on best practice on implementation of such a program. We are excited that the possibility to use local improvements to facilitate green retrofits is being considered, but anticipate it will take some time to design and roll out this type of program for residents. To conclude, in the updated priorities of the 18th Legislative Assembly, the Government of the Northwest Territories commits to investing in renewable resources and tourism, adapting to climate change in collaboration with other governments, and supporting the use of energy-efficient technologies in residential and commercial sectors. By adopting the amendments proposed in Bill 18, members are taking concrete steps towards achieving these priorities. Committee members, the time is now for this important step forward for the tax-based communities in the NWT. Moving ahead to allow for the implementation of an accommodation levy is a critical step in building a tourism sector that we can all be proud of. Doing so in a way that respects the interests and priorities of NWT tax-based communities is the right thing to do. Diversifying the economy, enhancing employment, tapping into additional revenues from sources outside the NWT is a winner for us all. We believe that a comprehensive consultation process has already occurred. We appreciate being able to review and discuss these important legislative changes with the Standing Committee, and we will look forward to your support in collaborating with us to enable the city's opportunity to become a reality. Thank you very much for this opportunity to meet with the Standing Committee on Government Operations today, and we'll conclude with a brief video.
He doesn't want any exclusions.
Yeah, so it's probably, I mean, it may not be worth asking him, but why would the bill permit them to do that if there's, I don't know. Just like, it would be interesting.
Thank you for that presentation. And just for our audio record, there was an audio-visual presentation with various pretty graphics and numbers on there. Sure, and I want to thank the city for presenting. If you wish to also submit something in writing, it would probably be appreciated by our research staff, just so we make sure we actually accurately reflect your views.
Sounds good.
I'll open the floor up to members if they would like some clarification or have some questions for the city. Mr. Van Thyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mayor Hike and Ms. Bazzi-Kellett and Ms. Penny for coming and presenting today. This has been a long time coming to even see this, so appreciate that we've reached this day. And we're having an opportunity here to basically check off 2 boxes potentially. So a couple of questions. One is, let's maybe go to the local improvement charge first. The public at large knows that the city of Yellowknife recently basically shot down their Energuide 80 standards. Maybe what you can do is, first of all, update us on where the city might be with enacting new Energuide standards or following through with bringing on new federal ones, or what is the status of that?
Thank you, Mr. Van Thyn. Mayor Hike.
I'll maybe start, and then I can pass it over to Ms. Bazzi-Kellett for some more detail. Part of what's happening with the building bylaw right now is there's an overall review of the entire bylaw, including those provisions as they relate to energy efficiency. So at this time, there's no movement specifically on the energy efficiency standards, but I expect that that'll probably be a discussion that the next council will want to have soon after the election.
Thank you, Ms. Bazzi-Kellett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The mayor is absolutely correct. As we're doing the review of the building bylaw right now, we know that that is the priority area in terms of the energy guidelines. That is the top issue that we are dealing with. We are doing some initial consultations on it, but recognize that some issues that we have with the overall regulatory framework for the building bylaw is something that we have been taking a look at that will guide our work going forward. So we have status quo right now, but really hope to get this going ASAP. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Thyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's good, because I would expect that in order to enact the local improvement charge for energy retrofit programs, that you're going to have some qualifier or some means of gauging success on what you're essentially allowing people to invest in. And that, in my view, the appropriate means to do that was through the previous Energuide 80 standards. And so I'm just troubled to see how a local improvement charge for energy retrofits could be applied if you don't have a measure. And so I would certainly like to see the city enact the latest version of Energuide 80, because that just seems to be the most applicable one and the one that the federal government is going to be in tune with. So I'm happy to hear that that will be coming forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Van Thyn. The mayor would like to respond. Mayor Hike.
Thanks. And just to provide one clarification, the bylaw still maintains the requirement to have an evaluation done and to post the results of that evaluation on a home. It simply removes the standard. So there is some measurement that remains. It's just that it's not as though residents or businesses have to meet a standard at the end of the day. So, thanks.
Thank you. Anything further from Mr. Van Thyn? Mr. Van Thyn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so now let's just skip over for a moment to the hotel, or what are we? The tourism levy. And I was rather pleased to hear that you acknowledged the what appears to be some of the administrative challenges that the bill as it currently is drafted presents. Because that would have been a question at some point in time, I think, by a number of folks, including the hotel industry, as to who's responsible for administering it. Because to some degree, it seemed like the onus is all on the hoteliers and or the anyone who is hosting, and that the cost to administer that would almost outweigh the fee itself. What do you envision as the way in which this would be administered then, if it wasn't going to be the accommodation individuals or hoteliers? How do you envision the administration being applied? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Van Thyn. Ms. Bazzi-Kellett?
We'll get Ms. Penny to respond.
Oh, sorry, Ms. Penny?
Thanks for the question. In discussions with some hotel providers and looking at other jurisdictions, one way that we envision it could occur is if the exempted parties could request the reimbursement from the city at a specified date, rather than put the exemption requirement determination on the frontline staff of hoteliers. And we've been advised that this happens in various jurisdictions of Alberta, so we would envision that would be a process where exemptions could still apply, but then the discretion is not being used at the front desk of hotels or accommodation providers. It would be on the exempted parties to request the essentially rebate afterwards.
Thank you. Anything further, Mr. Van Thyn? Nothing further from Mr. Van Thyn. Next, I have Mr. McNeely. Mr. McNeely?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. You had mentioned that in 770.1.5 that you don't support that. I'm just curious on your what your thoughts were collecting industry and applying it some funds to the individual homeowners sure through energy efficient purchases or retrofits. If I'm an outside individual and I say, okay, Mayor, you have national greenhouse programs such as a low carbon fund that you can tap into and other programs out there on a national level, why are you taking a tourism dollar and spending it to a retrofit of a home? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Hike.
Sorry for the any confusion that my presentation caused. So they're two very separate items. So the accommodation levy we fully support, and if the legislation passes third reading, then we expect that 100% of those dollars will go towards tourism activities. In our case, we've made a commitment that it'll be exclusively towards destination marketing. So the LIC portion of the Cities, Towns and Villages Act is a separate one that to date has dealt with neighborhood level improvements that serve a municipal purpose. But what we've seen in Southern Canada is a lot of programs emerging where municipalities will ultimately essentially finance either energy efficiency retrofits or the adoption of renewable energy technologies, and the homeowner or business owner pays that investment back through their property taxes. And so it has a number of advantages. It could be used, a program like that could be used in conjunction with things like the Low Carbon Economy Fund. There's other funding pots out there that could be used to contribute. And those funding pots often, will only fund 25 or 30 or 50% of a project. So something like the local improvement charges for energy efficiency retrofits could be used to make up the other part of that investment, which we see as the biggest barrier to residents adopting some of these technologies. So to answer your question, two very separate things, but both changes that we've been seeking in the CTV Act for quite some time.
Thank you. Does that clarify things, Mr. McNeely?
Yes, it does. Thanks for that clarification, and I think it's a well thought out plan, just my personal views on that. My other question is on the exemption of the customers or the clients. If I'm a leader from one of the land corporations, say in Delaney, I say, well, Mayor, why should I be exempt or why should I pay a tax when I'm already contributing to the city through the airport tax? And I don't really see anything in this cost deduction to my traveling to the city. What would be your comments on that? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McNeely. Mayor?
I guess I would say one of the challenges that municipalities, and this isn't unique to Yellowknife or the Northwest Territories, one of the challenges municipalities have is the limited amount of revenue sources that we can legally acquire. We're essentially limited to three main streams. One is property taxes, the other is user fees, and the third is transfers from other orders of government. So through those types of revenue generators, we don't really capture a penny from people who are coming from outside the community. So in terms of what the municipality can do to generate revenues, we have to rely on our own tax base essentially and the generosity of other governments to try to assemble our annual revenue requirements for our budgetary purposes. So a hotel levy, I mean, what it does, allows us to do, and granted, there will be some impact on people from outside of Yellowknife who are using accommodations. You know, when we sort of walk around the city today, we see the immense number of people out there who are clearly not from the Northwest Territories, but have traveled from many parts of the world to come see the Aurora and experience Northern and Indigenous culture. So we recognize there are some limitations and that it has some impact. But for us, really, you know, when we look at pieces of legislation like the CTV Act, that's a practical example that we've seen used to very positive effect in other places. It's not often that, you know, a sector of an industry comes out in support of a new tax, but that's exactly what we've seen with things like the accommodation levy, where the Hotel Association, individual hotel operators have come forward and said, we support this because we know from our experience in other parts of the country what a positive benefit it can have on our businesses in attracting more people. I would, I guess, just add that, you know, we're focused on the Cities, Towns, and Villages Act. We are representatives of the City of Yellowknife, but we see huge opportunities down the road for expanding the immense amount of tourism we have coming into Yellowknife out into the regions. We recognize that for people who may want to come for more than, you know, 3 days and nights, there are immense opportunities to reach out to other regions of the territory, to other communities in this region, and share that wealth that's coming into the community.
Thank you. Anything further, Mr. McNeely?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad to see that you're in support of the other communities outside of Yellowknife benefiting or in support of benefiting the tourism industry. So I suspect I would count on your support for the Delaney extension of the airport. So.
We've got direct flights.
Because we got a big lake and you got a big lake, so there's a lot of similarities. And it's only a side excursion of an hour and 10-minute flight. So I see down the road some joint initiatives by both the city and the community of Delaney. That's all I got to add there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McNeely. More of a comment. Next, Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this has been a long time coming. So really glad that you folks have come here this evening. I just want to ask about a couple of areas. One, the accommodation taxes. It's tourist accommodation taxes. It's referred to in the bill. First off, I agree with Mayor Hike that you shouldn't have to rely on the generosity of other orders of government, and my views on the lack of G&WT support for tourism in Yellowknife are well known on the record, which has sort of pushed the city to look at other ways to do it, and this is one of them. But you mentioned some concern about the exemptions that are listed in I guess it's 70.1 brackets 5. Any sense of what proportion of hotel business comes from or the areas that would be exempted? Any sort of sense, either a percentage or a dollar value of what that would constitute the overall hotel business sector? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. How shall I direct this? Ms. Bassie-Kellett?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We don't have that information readily available. We would rely on obtaining that from the Hotel Association themselves, part of the administration role that they would be playing on administering this, knowing that there are exemptions in place. Obviously, it will be less than if there were no exemptions. We would really prefer to see the ability for the rebate approach to be implemented if there do need to be exemptions. But certainly at this point in time, we are relying very heavily on our very collaborative partners in the Hotel Association to identify that information for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for that. We may have some way of estimating that ourselves, and certainly we can ask ITI that ourselves. But let's turn to the local improvement charges, and I note that even GNWT's energy strategy doesn't really contemplate a role for local governments. They're not even mentioned, I think, in there, and both Mayor Hike and I will remember our work with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, where there was some movement towards a national strategy on climate change, and local municipalities were seen as a key partner that could deliver on greenhouse gas reductions. And I think this is an area that could help with this. The one area that I think would, I guess I'd be looking to understand how the city would account for and report on the revenues, both from the accommodation tax, tourist accommodation tax, and the what would be invested in local improvement charges, and what the greenhouse gas reductions and so on would be. And I don't think that that's necessarily required by the legislation, although there has to be some financial accountability for the the tourist accommodation tax. But what sort of public reporting and tracking and accountability would you see in terms of the investment in tourism and the benefits that could be seen from this? And then on the local improvement charge side, ultimately we all want to reduce greenhouse gas reductions and reduce the cost of living and the cost of energy as well for families. So have you guys thought about what kind of reporting and tracking you do in those two areas? Could you talk a little bit about that? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Mayor Hike?
Perhaps I'll start and then I can pass it over to Ms. Bassey-Kellett for a little bit of additional detail. I think one of the overriding principles of our destination marketing organization and the desire to fund it with an accommodation levy is transparency. So we want to make sure that we're looking at the potential of kind of an arm's length organization whose responsibility is to market Yellowknife as a tourism destination, to be funded by the accommodation levy, and for the financials of those activities and the revenue that's generated by the accommodation levy to be absolutely transparent, so that the public and businesses and tourism operators and hotel owners, everyone will have a clear sense of how much is being generated, what it's being spent on, because I think it's a fundamental part of the relationship of trust that we have to establish with all of these businesses who are, helping to, in one form or another, helping to collect these revenues and pass this on to a third party to administer. So transparency will be very important there. On the local improvement side, I would say it's probably early days to try to answer that. Certainly there's simple models that we've seen in other parts of Canada and more complex models. For us at this point, I would say we're not advanced enough in program design to really get a better sense of what the GHG emission reductions might be and that part of it. So that's going to be a key if and when these changes go forward. Then we anticipate that we can start to get more into that program design side of things. To throw out a couple examples, there's Halifax's Solar City project, where the regional municipality of Halifax purchased 1,000 solar hot water heaters, and residents could come and sign up for that program. There was a approved list of qualified people to install them, and then that flowed from there, and people paid back the municipality for that investment. So that's a fairly simple, straightforward type of thing. There's other more complex ones that actually look at air sealing in homes and insulation upgrades and windows and doors and things like that. We anticipate, sort of from the feasibility study that we completed about 4 years ago now, things like wood pellet stoves would be a very simple, low-cost solution. If you're looking for major energy efficiency retrofits, what they call deep retrofits, you could be looking at the tens of thousands of dollars, which would eat up sort of any program funding that might be available. So all that to say, it's early days on that side of things, but there's plenty of good examples for the City of Yellowknife to look at.
Thank you, Mayor Hike. Mr. O'Reilly?
Said thank you.
Nothing further from Mr. O'Reilly. Anything further from committee? Seeing nothing, I want to thank the City of Yellowknife for its presentation. And we have until Friday, September 28th at 5 p.m. if you have any further electronic submissions or written submissions you'd like to make. Thank you. We have another presenter on our list from the Explorer Hotel, Mr. Carl Schaefer and Dan Dupuis. The witnesses, if you just want to introduce yourself, and then you can go right into your presentation.
Good evening. My name is Karl Schäfers, and this is Dan Dupuis. We are from the Explorer, represent the Explorer Hotel, and then would like to read a statement from our president, Ed Romanowski. Please go.
Mr. Dupuis.
Thank you very much. As Carl has mentioned, I'll just be reading a letter sent in from our president, Mr. Ed Romanowski. Unfortunately, we won't be able to answer any questions on it as he's not able to be here. So to get started, based on the legislation as drafted, the Explorer Hotel and Yellowknife and Unistar properties withdraw our support for the imposition of a tax on tourist accommodations, since the cost of the administration would likely far outweigh the amount of the tax collected. The legislation has not been thought through from an administrative perspective. As proposed, the cost of administration would be in the millions of dollars for industry and government, thus outstripping or consuming a majority of the taxes collected. Further review is also needed with respect to the use of the revenue and its administration. We support the concept of a tax on tourist accommodations, but we do not believe the administration of the tax, as proposed, is efficient and effective. He goes on in detail. The exclusions and exemptions listed in paragraph 70.1.5 and 6 are quite impractical and very costly to administer. It puts a burden of proof on the accommodation industry. A tax administration, audit, and enforcement structure will need to be set up and will cost taxpayers and the industry millions of dollars in the NWT. The exclusions and exemptions are numerous. The government of the Northwest Territories and supporting agencies, hundreds of them, the accommodation operator, usually someone at front desk reception or on reservations, will be required to make a judgment on whether or not the government official is on business or pleasure, and also collect a copy of their government ID. Ensure its authenticity, and then somehow retain all of this paper for tax administrators to check at some point in time in the future. How will the hotelier know exactly what agencies qualify? The list is far too long. We estimate that 25 to 30% of our guests may qualify to be excluded from paying the tax. Should our staff trust the government officials who make the bookings and arrive at the front desk and state that they are there on government business and qualify for the exemptions as the NWT government or an agency under the Financial Administration Act? And if the hotel is proven to be incorrect by the tax administration and enforcements, who pays that cost? I can assure you that it will not be the guest, but instead will be the hotel based on legislation as drafted. Importantly, such a tax administration system is impractical and unworkable. After discussions with our managers and staff, we do believe that we can comply with the legislation as drafted with a reasonable degree of confidence and accuracy. A person or his or her family being accommodated as a result of medical travel, and a person staying in a hospital or healthcare facility. Very interesting exclusions. How would someone prove this, and where would the burden of proof be in terms of the administration of the tax? Again, the collection and retention of evidence is foisted upon hoteliers, which is wrong and totally inappropriate. Mistakes and improperly documented cases reviewed by the tax administration would be paid for by hoteliers along with penalties, with no chance of recovering the tax and the cost of many hours of administration from the guests. If the governments want the hotels to document and administer the tax as outlined in the legislation, perhaps a significant portion of the tax, say 50% of it, should be retained by the hoteliers to pay for the cost of administering the tax. This does not sound like it's a feasible tax to impose with such exclusions, and the creation and administration of the tax has not been thought through with some common sense. To illustrate how poorly drafted the legislation is, it states that a person staying at a hospital or healthcare facility would not pay the tax. Obviously, a person staying in a hospital or healthcare facility would not pay the tourist accommodation tax since they are not staying at a tourist accommodation facility, as defined under the 70.1.1 of the proposed legislation. Of course, there's a long list of other possible exemptions noted in paragraph 70.1.5 and 6 of the legislation, again putting unreasonable burden on the hoteliers and creating a huge bureaucracy and administration for the collection and enforcement of the tax, which will inevitably cost the hotel industry and taxpayers millions of dollars. Why bother collecting the tax if the cost will likely exceed the revenue, or at the very best cost a majority of revenue collected? Just imagine the amount of information and paperwork to be collected and the arguments that will ensue between hotel reception staff, hotel accountants, hotel executives, and government officials, along with thousands of digital files and pages of paper that will need to be kept, and the thousands of hours spent by government officials each year to check and confirm the tax was appropriately exempted. Never mind the time required from the hotel staff. In many other jurisdictions where hotel accommodation taxes are imposed and collected, there are a few, if any, exclusions. In general, from an administrative cost perspective, all guests should pay the tax. If the governments, municipal or territorial, want to exclude certain parties from paying it, then the burden of proof should be placed on the guests, not the hoteliers. All guests would pay the tax at the hotels, and the guests could have the option of applying for a tax refund from the taxing jurisdiction, with the guest having to provide documentation that they qualify for the exemption. Now that makes a whole lot more sense. I am sure with this better setup, the governments will ensure that the exclusions list is far shorter and more practical to administer. In fact, they may just say that it's not worth it and decide that there should be no exclusions and exemptions. The NWT government and its employees are significant benefactors of the tourism industry in terms of tax revenues and employment. Almost all of the local government and NWT employees earn more than the average private sector worker, especially those serving them in hotels. Why wouldn't they pay the tax just like the others? They also enjoy significant benefits, enjoying the hospitality and benefiting from the tourism marketing and promotions. Ultimately, the hotel businesses create jobs and generate income that is fully taxed and helps pay for the government employees. Under the use of revenue, it states that the revenue collected can be used for the provision of services for visitors within the municipality. This is too broad and general in nature. I can easily see how these funds could be wasted on tourist information centers, community events, facilities, and other activities within the municipality that have limited value to promoting the tourism industry, getting more visitors to the destination. In most other jurisdictions, to avoid the misuse of the revenue, as well as use the funds for services that don't really promote or increase tourism and the associated politicization, debate, indiscretion, and administrative costs, the funds have been restricted for use in the promotion of tourism outside the jurisdiction collecting the tax. The only use of revenue under paragraph 70.3.1 should be what is currently point B, the promotion of the municipality or the Northwest Territories as a tourist destination. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dupuy and Mr. Schaefer, for the presentation, and you stated that you won't be answering questions as you were reading a statement on behalf of Mr. Romanowski, so you may be excused from the witness table. Thank you for presenting to committee. And the clerk will be contacting you about seeing if we can get maybe a paper copy or an electronic copy of that statement, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Do we have any further submissions on Bill 18? Seeing none, do members agree that we have concluded presentations from the public?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. And I want to thank all our witnesses, and I want to thank you on behalf of committee. As MLAs, it's a privilege to be here and to hear directly from you. When we make our report in the upcoming October sitting of the Legislative Assembly, we will highlight the feedback we received during these meetings and from other public submissions. If you still have questions about the bill or you would like to make a written submission, you can talk to our committee clerk or you can visit our website, assembly.gov.nt.ca. I will now adjourn this public meeting. There are light refreshments available in the back of the room. Please help yourselves, and once again, thank you.